Do you think in 20 years we'll still be sitting here and doing like podcasts?
Yeah, then I don't know. Maybe. Who knows?
You know what? In 20 years, we should be doing it while we are smoking a cigar and drinking mojitos somewhere.
We're going to regress to almost Mad Men style. It's what I'm sensing.
You know what? Suddenly I feel so much better about the next 20 years.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, you can never know. You can never predict. I don't have it yet. I don't have the perfect segue. But I was going to say, you can't predict where you're going to be 20 years from now. We even struggle just predicting one quarter. And for that, we're using a little something called pipeline coverage.
Yes.
And we're going to cover that today. There we go. Nailed it. I was like worried for a second that I'm not going to actually get the perfect segue done.
So, but wonderful pipeline coverage. I mean, we kind of totally got to that topic randomly.
Yeah,
almost.
we discuss it daily.
Mikkel, tell me, what do you think about pipeline coverage?
Well, it's pretty unhelpful, actually. I found out from studying. I've never used it myself. I've never been in sales.
By the way, untrue.
It's not true.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So this speaks into the unhelpfulness of it. Remember this big gecko board?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was on there somewhere.
It was on there all the time.
Yeah.
No one ever looked at this. That's why I also know for a fact. It's a true fact. It is known that PLC is absolutely useless.
No, but it was like this fuel gauge kind of thing. I was like,
that's what it was.
And then there was a number. I was like, PLC, what? Is it like TLC or I don't get it. Okay, moving on. So at least for me, it was pretty useless. My understanding of what it is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is you basically would like to know, am I going to hit this quarter? Do I have enough stuff in my pipeline that is actually going to get me there? That is the intention of the...
So how much bigger is your pipeline compared to the target you need to hit?
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. And then you have this 5x, 2x, 3x.
Yeah.
And you basically say like, hey, my pipeline is 5 times as large as the target I need to hit, or it's 3 times as large as the target I need to hit. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the idea of you're covering your pipeline by 3 times.
Yeah. And it was so funny for me because I'm this, almost naive marketer. Then reading about this.
Almost.
Then reading about this stuff, it was like, well, the problem kind of is you need, as a rule of thumb, to have a 3x pipeline coverage. And that means a win rate of 33%. I was just like, yeah, that doesn't sound like it's going to work out.
I mean, so it could, all right? So and that's actually one of the first flaws. So PLC, I think, was invented by IBM. Like they invented a lot of different things, like Bend, for example, IBM.
Yeah.
And they basically said, hey, you need a 5x PLC in order to hit your target, right? So when they did the big sales kickoff at the beginning of the year, there's like everyone, hey, you need to have, if your target is $1 million, you need to have 5 million in pipeline. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And obviously what that meant was you need to have a conversion rate-ish of 20%, right? In order to hit this 5x PLC, you need to have a 20% conversion rate. So how does that still kind of make sense if you have a smaller conversion rate than that? Well, thinking about it, you will create deals that enter pipeline in that year.
Yeah.
And they will have whatever conversion rate you will have. But at the same time, you will also pull in other deals from the previous year.
Yeah.
And they might be way further progressed. Right, they have been in there already for maybe 6 months or 9 months if you have an enterprise, and that's that's why we're talking about IBM. So it's the enterprise example, and they might enter your pipeline coverage with 90% close rate or something like that, right? So in a way that they kind of came up with like, hey, let's make it 5 times.
Yeah.
And I think, and this is the one upside that I see, it's extremely actionable in your conversation with sales reps.
Yeah.
But as a manager, not as a RevOps person, by the way. As a manager, you can go in and be like, okay, so instead of a year, let's look at this quarter. And you need to hit, I don't know, 200K. You only have a pipeline right now of 500K.
Yeah.
Well, that's only, 2.5 pipeline coverage. We in the business, we decided it needs to be 4.
Yeah.
So you're short.
Yeah.
And you're short 300,000 euros of pipeline.
Yeah.
So now that I'm making this a very impactful coaching session, I'm going to tell you now you need to have 300,000 more in pipeline, right? So what first of all, that's a good conversation to have to kind of show someone here's a gap without going through all of this conversion rate, whatever ACV complexity.
Yeah.
But the thing is now, what happens next? It's like the AE is, okay, well, I know this deal is only going to close next quarter, but theoretically, there might be a 5% chance it closes this quarter. Pulling that in.
Yeah.
Right? And because pipeline obviously only looks at what is the dollar amount of that deal that might end towards the end of the close towards the end of the the period, in this case quarter, it doesn't take into account the probability of that happening.
No.
And that's okay. That's again part of the simplicity of this thing, right? Kind of let's look at kind of raw pipeline. And you can do that. You can because you walking into the next quarter, and maybe you have lost faith in a couple of opportunities already. You're like, in order to make this conversation with Jack, my wonderful manager, a bit easier, let's drag those deals into this. Whoops.
Was that Greg then?
Yeah, exactly. And what you're gonna do is, I haven't even talked about some of the self-prospecting pieces here. You could go in, you could increase the deal size, you could create another opportunity with something that maybe half bogus. You could, and you could have something totally legit in here, a $1 million deal with Coca-Cola, but chances of that one closing this quarter or next quarter are extremely low.
Yeah.
But guess what? Pipeline coverage achieved.
Yeah.
You have the 800K that you needed, right? So there's lots of different ways you can play around and game this whole thing, which then also make it extremely, not that useful.
Yeah.
This is where then the whole friction comes from, the sales manager to then go in, call bullshit on all of those deals to kick them out.
Yeah.
And once he or she kicked them out, it's like pressure on, you need to create more opportunities. And then guess what's going to happen? The whole cycle is just going to continue.
Yeah.
It's like there's going to be an ongoing discussion what should be in the pipeline versus what shouldn't. And I don't think that's actually helping to close any kind of deals.
No.
So that's my fundamental disagreement with pipeline coverage. I think it goes a little bit further as well. Number one, some people just throw around a number, 5 or 4 or 3 or 2, without, and it sounds, to the naive marketing ears,
exactly.
sounds like weird, but they actually don't connect it to their conversion rate. So they don't actually, okay, if you have, and no one says that. So in Falcon, we had a 10 or 12% conversion rate. We're very much, outbound leaning and so forth. So really, and really what we needed was an 8x or 9x of pipeline.
Yeah.
No one ever, I've never ever seen anyone say, we need our PLC target is 10.
Yeah.
No one ever says
Well, we
that.
missed on revenue and opportunities, but you know what? We hit the PLC target.
Yeah. And so that's what I'm kind of saying is like people sometimes get lost with the connection between the multiple and the numbers behind it. So that's kind of a thing. But then the other piece that I think is extremely dumb is when.
Yeah.
When do you need what pipeline coverage actually to hit your target? And I can tell you what, if you graph it out, and you should totally graph it out, by the way, what's the pipeline for a specific quarter and when? Yeah. So let's just say you're looking at Q1 pipeline and you're in November. You will have a little bit of pipeline already parked for Q1.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not going to be a Q4 deal. It's not going to be a Q5 deal either.
I was going to say.
Yeah. It's a Q1 deal.
Yeah.
So, you park it in there already.
Yeah.
And it will be relatively small compared to what you have in Q4. And then as you progress throughout Q4, more and more deals will crystallize and, okay, it's actually a Q1 thing, right? Where then there's a massive shift happening between quarters is in the last week or so of Q4. And the first week of Q1 is you will win a couple of Q4 deals. You might even lose a couple of those. But for many of those opportunities, they will just get pushed into Q1. So you will suddenly see an immense kind of deflation happening of your Q4 pipeline.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. That's expected behavior. And at the same time, you will see a spike in the Q1 pipeline happening because obviously all of these things are being pushed over into this thing. Then, and it's unclear when in the quarter, you will see it's peaking out at some point.
Yeah.
At some point, it's peaking out. So the Q1 pipeline is going to be at, wherever it's going to be. And then it's going to start dropping slowly and then quickly.
Yeah.
And when? Well, it's going to be the exact same pattern that you had in Q4. It's going to be towards the end of it. You win a lot and so forth, and some of these things pushing over. So this was pipeline.
Yeah.
That kind of makes a lot of, sense. Obviously, you have this double counting happening where there's, one opportunity is counted as pipeline in Q4 and in Q1 and maybe even in Q2.
Yeah.
That's kind of weird. But, that does make sense to a large degree. Now, if you overlay that with pipeline coverage, though, it gets extremely weirdo, which is why I don't think it's useful in many cases to use this as a management tool.
Yeah.
Right? Because, okay, let's look in, you're in November and you're looking at Q1 and you have some pipeline in there. No one would do that. It's just an example. And you see, my pipeline coverage is 20%. So instead of 300% or 2x, whatever, it's just, 0.2x. So that's obviously an issue, but no one cares about that. So now you're walking into Q1. On the first day, you will have whatever coverage. And you know what? That might be good. It might also be bad. There's literally no way of calculating, what that number should be on the first day.
Yeah.
I give you a trick in a minute or two when, of how you can actually use that potentially. But I'm just saying, kind of, there's no way you can calculate what is the right number, what's the wrong number here.
Yeah.
Now, what makes this extremely difficult now to manage is that there's so many ways the pipeline coverage can be impacted, right? We talked about the pipeline itself already. So deals can be pulled in, deals can die, deals can be pushed out.
Yeah.
But they can also close win. If you close win a deal, it drops out of pipeline.
Yeah.
That makes sense, right? Marketing Mikkel?
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
But what now happens is that, which also logically makes sense, the gap for you that you need to cover to your target decreases, right? So you have a deal that drops out of pipeline. It drops into target achievement. That gap between where your target is and where your actuals are is now shrinking a little bit.
Yeah.
And, already here, okay, is it actually going to be a net positive coming out of this? It's going to be a net negative because you lose a deal and and this is where this just becomes extremely unhelpful in an overall way to manage this thing, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so much stuff can happen with your pipeline coverage.
Yeah.
Some of that is kind of easy logic. Some of that is starting to be convoluted logic.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's like, well, since I now understand that my pipeline coverage won't be an even 5 throughout the quarter, it will fluctuate a lot. When should it be where?
Yeah.
And when should the alarm bells go off?
Yeah.
And that is basically completely, it's just not there.
No.
I'm sorry, it's just not there. It doesn't make any sense. You can't have any kind of opinion about it further than that looks good, or that looks bad. And where it really then ends up being kind of useful is really in the AE conversation, not on your funnel management.
Yeah. So you said you could use this PLC.
Yeah.
So how do you actually use it, right? You mentioned the AE scenario is great for management.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
You know what? Maybe I need to kind of take this back. I'm not sure how to use PLC, but you can use the pipeline graph. And the way you can use the pipeline graph, and it's a little bit like silly, but it's powerful, I believe. You start plotting this whole thing like I explained earlier, right? So whenever there's a deal that has a closing date in a specific quarter, that adds to pipeline of that quarter. And as more deals add up, as pipeline in that quarter, kind of that graph kind of increases.
Yeah.
What you're gonna see, multiple curves, of each quarter kind of overlapping to a degree.
Yeah.
That in itself isn't quite useful. What is useful is that you want to see those peaks, and they're going to always, end up being around the same 1 or 2 weeks of the quarter, by the way. You want to see those peaks increasing time over time.
Yeah.
Right. Every quarter's pipeline should have a larger or higher peak than the one before.
Yeah.
And best case, that increase is correlating with the increase you have in targets. If those two things kind of match, then you can use it as an early warning sign to say like, okay, things are kind of going well because, you know, the peak is 10% or 20% higher than Q3, which matches my target that I actually need to in Q4, which is 20% higher. So that could maybe actually work out, right? Looking at pipeline coverage, I don't know. I think this is, and you know, some people might kind of really not like to hear this, and I think there might be some different ways to maybe use it in very large enterprise businesses and kind of motions. But generally speaking, I think the PLC is going to be all over the place most of the time. If you plot it out, maybe you see a pattern that works for you and that you can expect going forward. That is not just data mining, cherry picking kind of pattern, but it's a robust pattern that you could use. Then maybe it might help you. But otherwise, I think it's really, I would rather focus on pipeline itself. You know, use that as a metric. It has its flaws as well, by the way, but use that as a metric and compare, you know, where you're capping out every quarter in terms of pipeline and as a whole. And compare that to the previous quarter and, you know, the target that you need to hit.
It also does strike me almost just as a health kind of indicator. That's not really doing much, because you will do the forecasts and have that conversation, which is going to be, you know, we can hide our opinions about it, but it's going to be a little bit more accurate at least, right?
Yes.
So what is the alternative? If you want to, in a very accurate and structured way, want to manage your revenue funnel, I'm not just talking about this quarter, but also next, right? Because you're kind of talking about, well, the challenge is you're pushing things over to next quarter is a normal thing. As you know, talk with people and they go like, hey, I need the budget and it's not going to be until next quarter, right? So it's a normal thing. How do you then do that? How do you manage the funnel then?
So I think, and again, some of this stuff depends a little bit what your motion is. If you're SMB versus mid-market versus enterprise. And let me try and kind of piece it all together. I think having with the AE a conversation around the amount of pipeline they have without creating some kind of a weird pressure that the AE needs to come up with adding pipeline, because that will lead to bad behavior. I think it's good to have that conversation, by the way. So like, hey, you know, you need to be extremely lucky in order to convert that into, you know, the target, and what's the action plan to fix that, right? Kind of approaching it like that, I think is much more helpful. Then you have your ongoing forecasting sessions, right? The weekly sales execution meetings, like where, you know, what is closing this week, next week, and so forth. And that will kind of give you the track towards, you know, target in that sense. And I think then the other thing is, and this is where all of these different things overlap, by the way, right? Your pipeline is also counted in your forecast and so forth. But I would have a look at how many new deals are you receiving or being added to your pipeline, as an indicator of, you know, what's the deal flow looking like, and how's my pipeline going to potentially look like going forward, right? There's some leading indicators to your AE's book of business and the portfolio that they're working. I would look at these three items, and depending whether on your SMB or enterprise, you'll be leaning on some of them heavier than on others. Right? If you're very much enterprise, forecasting will be the game to play for you. Because it could be that you're in January and your next deal is going to close in October, and that's totally fine. That's like, okay, let's work towards that. What are the different things that need to be achieved? Where are we? You know, and then there's the ultra focus on where are we in the process. You're forecasting them to be October. Okay. What, you know, tell me what are the things that need to happen in order to actually hit that deadline. Right. And that will be a very fruitful, very long conversation. And obviously, you know, as part of that conversation, you can also have, well, what's your pipeline then looking like for, you know, that is a $750K deal. You have a 1 million target. Do you have a smaller one that maybe could fall on either side of that? And then you have a conversation around this, right? When you're mid-market, obviously your forecasting will be more towards the end of the month and the end of the quarter. You have all of this backloadedness in there, right? And you don't want to, it's too many deals to walk through them all the time, even in a one-on-one scenario.
Yeah.
So you want to have more pressure on, this flow and the system actually working out.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's more on, okay, how's pipeline overall looking, and are you getting new pipeline and enough of that?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And are you able then to convert that, right? Have more focus on that. If you're like SMB, I would throw forecasting out the window. If I were you, honestly.
Yeah.
I would even throw pipeline out the window.
Yeah.
I would just focus on how many deals are you getting?
Yeah.
What's your conversion rate? What's your ACV?
Yeah.
Is it higher or lower than your peers?
Yeah.
Or your last quarter and so forth? I would only focus on that stuff, actually. And that's sometimes pretty funny. It's because everyone is telling everyone, oh, you need to have a forecast, and it needs to be like, what's the forecast for the end of the quarter, Tony? And when I was working in this really SMB company, and it was January, and they asked me about forecast for end of March, I'm like, so number one, that's what a sales forecast means, right? It's open opportunities and, what I think will actually close by the end of the quarter. But it's the second week of January, and I have 2-week sales cycles. I have literally another, 8 weeks to generate pipeline and deals. I don't know. If I told you my actual sales forecast for the quarter on the deals I have live right now, it would be pretty disappointing, dear boss.
Yeah.
So I can't actually give you the forecast. So this is where it's then a mix between sales forecasting and modeling. Really kind of, that's where the blend starts to happen much earlier, because what needs to be part of your quote unquote forecast also needs to be the opportunities you're going to create tomorrow and then close in 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
And that then means your forecast, quote unquote, also then needs to include opportunities that you are expecting to open based on new hires, based on other things, and so forth.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why talking about pipeline and pipeline coverage in SMB, I don't think it's super useful.
No.
Again, I think one application for that can be you have a one-on-one with your AE. You look at the book of business that they're working on, the deals that they're working on, and if that is a specific size compared to what they need to kind of close, you can kind of use this ongoingly, right? Kind of what's your pipeline look like, and comparison to your target. You kind of get it's a nice rule of thumb kind of feeling, right? Especially for this. Again, are you using pipeline or PLC? It doesn't matter right now. But there's some shorthands in here that I'm sure some people are using successfully in order to kind of do this specific management, right? But for you reporting to your CEO where you're going to have your number at, I think using PLC is, in that case, pretty poor, actually, right? And in general, I think kind of zooming out fully here and going away from the people management and kind of what is your best guess, I think boringly so, the answer is the revenue formula, not the podcast, but basically kind of the logic, right?
Yeah.
What were the opportunities you created when?
Yeah.
What is your historic conversion rate? What's your historic ACV? What's your historic, average sales cycle? And you look at the opportunities if you created in the last 6 months and when, and then math it out. That will get you incredibly close. There are additional things to consider, obviously. And then again, if you're a company that closes 1 deal per quarter, which is, sometimes it's good, you could be a scale up and that could be your pace.
Yeah.
Then kind of that math approach is probably not going to yield the best results. Then you rather want to be like, okay, let's talk to Jimmy, the AE, and dig into that deal, right?
Yeah.
That might be the better way to actually do it.
Yeah. I wonder what Jimmy's like.
Jimmy's a cool guy.
But
Actually. You know what? It's a girl. Yeah.
But I think it makes sense. Also, so the thing is, PLC as a concept, it's so easy to kind of apprehend and probably even math out, versus the revenue formula. You will need to spend a bit of time on this, right? You really need to get that understanding of the business through, in order to use it. But I still think you will probably have to find another way to manage your your funnel, actually. And PLC, great for managing AEs. You can totally use it when you're enterprise. But beyond that, you need to kind of reconsider what can you do instead.
No, and I mean, so if you wanted to take some of this PLC stuff a little bit to the next level, and I'm just coming up with this while
On
we're
the fly.
talking about it. Maybe you need to have different PLCs for inbound versus outbound opportunities.
Wow. Unblended PLC.
Unblended PLC. It's the next thing.
Yeah.
I feel Chris Walker is going to talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah. That's the cutting edge. That's the cutting edge.
But if you're honest about it, and you can kind of play the outro here. But if you're honest about it, that's something that you should actually be considering, right? Kind of if someone gets a lot of outbound stuff and I'm hitting my PLC, also not helpful. Anyway, I think you know what? To make this a bit more opinionated, ditch PLC.
Yeah. Okay.
End
wow.
of story.
I'm striking the working title here now and then ditch PLC.
Yeah, that's.
But anyway, we should try and totally get Chris Walker on this show.
We should.
I'm gonna put my ass on the line here and say I'm gonna get him on the show. I promise you that.
Sure, Mikkel. Sure, Mikkel. As spoken like a true naive marketer.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
That's the only thing I do.
So what is it that I need to do if you achieve that, and what is it that you need to do if you don't get to achieve it?
Can I think about it until the next episode?
Sure.
I just want it to be really, really good.
There you go. Okay, wonderful.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you, Mikkel. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone who's
listener.
watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.